I don't know what people will say, but I think if I take Nkrumah off, Acheampong is my next hero. He was very genuine and he wanted to restore the Ghanaian dignity.
In Ghana's 65 years of existence, there is one leader who rightly stands tall above all others. For his instrumental leadership in Ghana's liberation struggle from British colonial rule to his unparalleled economic achievements afterwards, this leader is none other than the first president of Ghana, Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Indeed, there are many who say that after Nkrumah, all other leaders have failed Ghana, but this is not exactly accurate, as there was a leader who took power a few years after Nkrumah and in many tangible ways worked hard to revive the economic projects of Nkrumah that had been abandoned by the NLC traitors. That was not all. This leader also largely restored Ghana's image and prestige on the African continent that had been badly damaged after Nkrumah was illegally deposed. This leader is General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, Ghana's head of state from January 1972 to July 1978. A man who led Ghana for 6.5 years but has been largely erased from history, which explains why many overlook him when talking about the leaders Ghana has had. If Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was the redeemer, then General Acheampong was Ghana's second chance at redemption. A critical study of the lives of both men reveals a lot of striking similarities, from their kind and selfless nature to their total belief in the necessity of self-reliance and economic independence, to their genuine love for Ghana and Africa, to even the sheer hatred and demonization they both faced. Even the struggles of their wives and children in the years after their passing bears very striking similarities. The aim of this video is to lay out these many striking connections between Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, two men who can very well be described as quintessential nationalists and Pan-Africanists. For President Nkrumah, the political independence that Ghana had attained in 1957 was always going to be worthless without economic independence. Under colonial rule, Ghana's natural resources were simply extracted and exported for the benefit of the colonialists. At independence, no industries existed in Ghana, and not even a pin or a handkerchief was being made locally. As Nkrumah put it himself, we were reliant upon the outside world, and more particularly upon the United Kingdom, for practically everything we use in our daily life. Knowing full well that the only real and true independence is economic independence, Nkrumah knew that this reality had to change, and this is exactly what he sought to achieve with his plan to industrialize Ghana. In 1961, just 5 years after independence, over 60 new factories had been opened in Ghana. Among them was a distillery, a coconut oil factory, a brewery, a milk processing plant, and a lorry and bicycle assembly plant. In subsequent years, many more industries will be established. These include a steelworks at Tema, 2 cocoa processing factories at Tema and Takoradi, 2 sugar refineries, a glass factory, a chocolate factory, and a meat processing factory. In addition to all this, work was well advanced on a textile mill and a complex of food industries at Tema, a gold refinery at Takwa, and an asbestos, cement, shoe and rubber tire factories in Kumasi. With all these industrial developments, Ghana was making great progress in using her abundant raw materials to feed the industries the Nkrumah government had established, and this saw an ever-increasing decline in the importation of basic consumer goods. For example, Ghana under Nkrumah produced her own matches, shoes, nails, chocolates, soft drinks, canned fruits, paints, and many more. This is the same Ghana that at independence had not a single industry and did not produce even pins or matchsticks. Clearly, the transformation of Ghana from a raw material producing and import-dependent economy to an increasingly industrialized and self-reliant country under President Nkrumah is undeniable. But this forward march to economic independence will be halted on the 24th of February 1966, when President Nkrumah was illegally deposed by traitors in the Ghana Army and Police. This saw a reversal of Nkrumah's industrialization agenda, as many of the factories that were completed or near completion were abandoned. A typical example is the gold refinery, which was located at Takwa. It was 90% complete at the time of the coup, but it was totally abandoned by the NLC. Another example is the reinforced concrete panel factory, which had been completed and only needed working capital to begin operating. This was also abandoned by the NLC. The cocoa silos, which were built to give Ghana greater leverage in the world cocoa market, are also another prominent example of the abandoned projects after the illegal overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. For the Ghanaian people, widespread unemployment was the inevitable outcome of the reversal of Nkrumah's industrialization agenda by the same people who claimed that they were their liberators. The deindustrialization of Ghana will remain the case until 7 years later, when General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong took power in a bloodless coup. Many of the industrial projects that had been started by President Nkrumah but had been abandoned by the NLC will be revived by the National Redemption Council government led by General Acheampong. One such project was the fish canning factory located at Tema. Initially started by the Nkrumah government, this important project was abandoned after the 1966 coup by the NLC and was revived by the Acheampong government in 1973. This was done to ensure that Ghana could produce her own canned fish products, such as sardines and mackerels locally, and formed part of the broad policy by General Acheampong to make Ghana self-sufficient in food production through Operation Feed Yourself. That was not all. The fish canning factory formed part of the Tema Food Complex, which had other industrial projects that were also abandoned by the NLC after the coup. Two more of these projects were revived by the Acheampong government, namely the fish meal plant and a vegetable oil mill. Another project that was begun by Kwame Nkrumah and abandoned by the NLC, only to be revived by General Acheampong, was the ceramics factory at Salt Pond. Construction of the factory began in 1964, but was only completed in 1973 by General Acheampong. The reinforced concrete panel factory, which at the time of the 1966 coup had been completed and only required working capital to commence operations, but was abandoned by the NLC, was also revived by General Acheampong. Indeed, it can rightly be said that General Acheampong is the only leader who actively worked to revive the many factories that were built in the 1960s under Kwame Nkrumah and also go on to make other productive investments.
If Dr. Kwame Nkrumah hasn't talked about integrated development, we will be the most sorrowful state in Ghana. And also, let me even chip in. Anytime we talk, we leave General Kutu Acheampong. Let me stand up and pay tribute for him. May his soul rest in peace. If you take Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the next person who is supposed to provide investment, productive investment, is Dr. the late Kutu Acheampong. I'm going to mention two. When I was young, Kumasi used to do wabe. We would drink from wabe. Acheampong said, no. If the population grows, we wouldn't have water. So let us go to Barakesi. Accra. Today, people have forgotten about Acheampong. The Pond Dam. Go and check your record. Pond Dam, when Acheampong had finished Barakesi, he said, no, Accra is expanding. Tema is not looking at wager. Then he put up this Pond Dam. And then he didn't do the dam. Then he said, let us get electricity. I mean, and at that time, don't forget, the reason why I pay tribute to is that what we called Yentria policy, which meant that the Western world did not even want to talk to him, but he used internally generated resources. That year, I think we produced 4 million metric tons of cocoa. I was in school. My father is a chief farmer. You produced 400 million, and cocoa was selling over 1,000 pounds. I think 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. Acheampong made a lot of money. And he look at Pond, and it's all over. If you go to, and the estates, these Sagrimi estates, or what they are calling about,
Acheampong was in charge of, is it Sakumono?
No, those things, Dansuman, Teshinungwa, Kumasi, Sunyani. I mean, he was a man who, to me, if you take Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, I possibly rank him the next person when it comes to productive investment.
Right.
Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the constant fundamental objective was the need for economic independence for Ghana. A key means of achieving this objective was industrialization, and as we have shown, President Nkrumah went all out to make Ghana an industrialized nation. Beyond that, there was also the need to invest in and diversify the agricultural sector so as to ensure that Ghana became self-sufficient in food production, and also to ensure that there was adequate supply of raw materials for all the industries that had been established. This included farmers being provided with practical advice on how to use their land to the best advantage and to produce greater yields. They were also assisted by hire purchase and cooperative schemes to acquire modern agricultural machinery and processing equipment. The Nkrumah government also acquired large tracts of land and established state farms to augment agricultural production. These state farms cultivated 24,000 acres of rubber, oil palm, banana, coconut, citrus, and many more. An additional 12,500 acres was also cultivated by the agricultural wing of the Workers' Brigade. Many of these state farms, together with rubber and cotton plantations that were being cultivated under Kwame Nkrumah, were also abandoned by the NLC, and many valuable crops were lost due to the lack of attention. This neglect of Ghana's agricultural sector will only last for a few years, however, as General Acheampong revived the great attention that was given to agriculture under Kwame Nkrumah. The transformational Operation Feed Yourself policy was introduced, and this saw the government not only make serious investments into agriculture, but also encourage Ghanaians to venture into farming, even if it was starting a backyard garden in their homes. For General Acheampong, just like President Nkrumah before him, it was unacceptable for Ghana to be importing food that it was possible to produce locally. To ensure the success of Operation Feed Yourself, the government procured agricultural machinery for farmers and constructed roads to make it easy to transport farm produce to market centers. Also, major agricultural projects were built to boost food production. Prominent among them were the Dowenya and Tono irrigation projects.
He believed that we had enough resources to be independent. We had enough resources to turn wastelands into productive areas. At that time, Dowenya was a wasteland. And some of us, some Saturdays, we all took to Dowenya with pickaxes to dig the earth to ensure that an irrigation project was in place. And it advanced very well. Similar things were started in other parts of the country to turn this country from a rain-fed pattern of agriculture into irrigation-assisted agriculture. That was a major, major, major step.
Okay.
And that kicked into the Operation Feed Yourself, and pretty soon we're self-sufficient in some of the grains.
As a result of Operation Feed Yourself, Ghana achieved self-sufficiency in rice production for 2 straight years, with rice imports falling to zero in both 1975 and 1976. Farmers in the northern region even began to export rice and other crops to Burkina Faso and other neighboring countries. Another policy of General Acheampong to ensure self-reliance was Operation Feed Your Industries. As the name suggests, this policy was to ensure that the industries that were mainly begun by Kwame Nkrumah, abandoned by the NLC, and revived by General Acheampong will have an adequate supply of local raw materials to keep them running. In many ways, General Acheampong proved through his Operation Feed Yourself and Operation Feed Your Industries policies that it was possible for Ghana to produce enough to be self-reliant and not dependent on others, just as President Nkrumah had proven a few years earlier. Today, Ghana's President John Mahama is actively working to bring back General Acheampong's Operation Feed Yourself and Operation Feed Your Industry policies, after promising to do so in his election-winning campaign.
Agriculture and agribusiness shall be one of the key anchors of our economic transformation plan. We will launch a program akin to the Operation Feed Yourself and Feed Your Industries program of the early 1970s. This is geared to make Ghana self-sufficient in basic staples and curb unnecessary imports.
Beyond ensuring that Ghana became self-reliant in food production, President Nkrumah also took steps to make Ghana independent in strategic sectors of the economy. One of these sectors was shipping. After independence, Ghana was completely reliant on foreign shipping lines for the import and export of goods. This left Ghana at the mercy of these foreign shipping lines, who could hold Ghana to ransom whenever they wanted. With this in mind, President Nkrumah worked to establish Ghana's own shipping line, known as the Black Star Line. This ensured that Ghana could have control over her own shipping and also earn much needed foreign exchange, which was previously going to the foreign shippers. Similar reasons also motivated President Nkrumah to establish a national airline, known as Ghana Airways. A few years later, General Acheampong will also work hard to effectively manage and strengthen these strategic national assets. He expanded the fleet of the Black Star Line with new and modern vessels, the only other leader after Kwame Nkrumah that this can be said about. As the nationalist leader that Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was, the unjust situation that existed in the colonial period with regards to the foreign ownership of Ghana's natural resources was unacceptable and needed to change. Indeed, steps to turn things around in Ghana's favor started long before independence, as in 1952, Kwame Nkrumah, as the leader of government business, introduced new taxes on the foreign mining companies operating in the then Gold Coast. Later, after independence, President Nkrumah set up a committee to look into the country's mining sector and to then make recommendations on the best way for Ghana to manage the sector and extract maximum benefits. This committee was chaired by a minister called Gbeku, and they looked into the mining and timber industries. The committee duly presented its report in 1961 and recommended that not only should minerals be vested in the state, but the state should also participate in the equity share capital of mining companies to the extent of 51%. In other words, the committee recommended that the state should take majority shares in mining companies operating in Ghana. The plan of President Nkrumah was to nationalize the gold mines after the expiration of the lease the foreign mining companies had, but this was not to be due to the 1966 coup. Just months after taking power in 1972, General Acheampong will dust off this committee report from the Nkrumah era and implement the recommendation of Ghana taking majority share in the mining companies. This was done by the signing of a decree and also saw the Ghanaian state take majority shares in major foreign timber companies operating in Ghana. Unfortunately, all these gains will be reversed in subsequent years. In Ghana's history, the only two leaders who have embarked on massive public housing projects nationwide are Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong. Under President Nkrumah, not only was the township of Tema built from scratch to provide affordable housing for workers, but there were also estates built, including in Laboni, Kanda, Airport Residential, Osu Ringway, and Awodome in Accra. There were also estates built in Kumasi, such as those in Patasi, North and South Sontreso, and in Kwadaso. Under General Acheampong between 1972 and 1978, this focus of the state on providing affordable housing for the Ghanaian people was revived. Dansoman Estates, which for years was the biggest in West Africa, was built. Teshinongwa Estates was also another project of General Acheampong. Public housing projects were also undertaken in Jowulu, North Legon, and East Legon. In Kumasi, an estate was built in Bokrom near the airport to replicate the airport residential area in Accra that was built by President Nkrumah. Low-cost public houses were also built in all of Ghana's regional capitals by General Acheampong. An example is the Kalpohin Estate in Tamale and the low-cost housing project in Adreso in the eastern regional capital of Koforidua.
In Ghana today, when you say affordable housing, it ends up being, more for the wealthy than for the poor. And so I call it low-cost housing. Acheampong used to call it low-cost housing, and they built so many of them all across the length and breadth of this country.
Most strikingly, despite building so many public houses for ordinary Ghanaians to live in, neither General Acheampong nor President Nkrumah took a single one of these houses for themselves. Clearly, for them, it was always about the welfare and happiness of the people, and not themselves. If there are two Ghanaian leaders about whom a lot of falsehood has been peddled about their character, it is General Acheampong and Kwame Nkrumah. It is not uncommon to find some young Ghanaians today who believe that General Acheampong murdered people and committed all kinds of crimes during his time in power. But the truth is that, in spite of the many coup attempts against him, General Acheampong never executed anyone. In fact, the man was always strongly opposed to bloodshed, and it is important to note that his coup was the only one to be bloodless in Ghana's history. Like Acheampong, Kwame Nkrumah also hated bloodshed and never executed anyone, in spite of the fact that there were 6 assassination attempts on his life. For some, the kindness of both leaders to those who hated them and wanted to eliminate them was a weakness, as this allowed their enemies to live and fight another day. In spite of all this, both leaders have been demonized over the years as being dictators. But which kind of dictators repeatedly refuse to execute those who try to eliminate them?
What would you say about Acheampong's rule?
I don't know what people will say, but I think if I take Nkrumah off, Acheampong is my next hero. He was very genuine, and he wanted to restore the Ghanaian dignity, you know. And he had the misfortune of the Arab-Israeli war that when the price of fuel between $3 and $4 a barrel went up to over 30, $30 to nearly $40 per barrel. That really derailed the Acheampong's program. But Acheampong's time, the economy actually recovered. And had it not been this war that virtually made it impossible for him to run because of the high energy cost, I think this country would have been better off.
Why do you think history has dealt him such a hard blow? Because you rarely hear of him.
The history has also done Nkrumah a hard blow, because when people really go in to find out exactly what he did, then those people who had overthrown him might not find the justification.
One of the many striking connections between Kwame Nkrumah and General Acheampong is the very violent reactions they faced. In the case of Nkrumah, this was in the form of the 24th February coup, which saw unprecedented violence being visited on the people of Ghana. Many innocent Ghanaians were brutally murdered. Most prominent amongst the victims were Major General Duah and his guards. Many others were also brutalized, tortured and sexually assaulted simply for being associated with President Nkrumah. In 1979, another arguably more violent reaction will befall General Acheampong, who, despite having been forced out of power for almost a year, was captured and executed along with 7 other generals. Many other Ghanaians were also killed before and after this. Despite giving grace to those who plotted against him, General Acheampong will not be done the same favor. If there are 2 leaders who qualify to be described as the most demonized in Ghana's history, it will have to be Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong. For Nkrumah, the opposition even before independence had resorted to lies and slander in order to cause disaffection for him in the eyes of Ghanaians. This campaign will continue and intensify after the 1966 coup, when all sorts of lies were concocted in order to portray Kwame Nkrumah as the devil's incarnate. In the case of General Acheampong, it was the same thing all over again, as all sorts of false allegations of corruption were made in a bid to demonize the man. He was accused of stealing money and stashing it in Swiss bank accounts. He was also accused of owning houses in Switzerland and London. It was mainly for these unproven allegations that he was executed in 1979. Till date, no one has been able to provide any shred of evidence to justify the claims of corruption against General Acheampong. Like Nkrumah, time has shown that he was demonized in order to enable and justify his elimination.
But mostly he's portrayed as this military leader who was into cronyism, who was a bit of the... I mean, a lot more negative things are associated with his name than positive, if one will call it.
That is because when you don't have an alternative narrative,
okay,
when you have a certain narrative and you don't have a... Because who was going to campaign for Acheampong to tell his story?
Okay, that's
interesting. You see, and look, Acheampong, Operation Feed Yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, he brought it. Yentuya, he was the one who brought it. He's the only leader since Kwame Nkrumah who has stood up to imperialism and colonialism. He's the only one. Who else? And maybe at Tamils, when you stood up against them about this homosexuality thing. Apart from that, everybody has been, you know, not brave enough to take on the colonial masters. You see, so Acheampong, apart from Kwame Nkrumah, in my books, is the best leader that we've ever had.
If further evidence was needed about the fact that the many allegations of corruption that were made against General Acheampong and Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah were false, it can be found in the struggles their wives faced with their children in the years after their passing. In the case of Kwame Nkrumah's wife, Madam Fatia, the responsibility for caring for their 3 children fell squarely on her shoulders after her husband passed on in April 1972. With Kwame Nkrumah leaving no inheritance to his wife and children, and even handing over the one house which was built for him by supporters to the state of Ghana, one can only imagine the difficulties Madam Fatia had to face in taking care of their children. These struggles are best captured by the fact that she at a point was forced to sell her engagement ring, which was given to her by her husband, Kwame Nkrumah, in order to pay for the school fees of their children. For General Acheampong's wife, Madam Faustina Acheampong, the story is no different, as she also had to face real difficulties in the years after her husband's passing. She moved to settle in London and for many years shared a flat with a friend until she was given a council flat. She later had to work as an auxiliary nurse in the UK, even though she was a qualified Ghanaian midwife. In fact, for years after her husband's passing, Madam Faustina Acheampong had to rely on financial support from friends of her husband to survive.
I went there to work as a professional. I did not see him put his hand into the kitty. I wasn't given that opportunity.
Okay.
I hear stories, but I cannot vouch if I cannot say that I saw them. And I don't think, because I would emphasize the fact that since the events of his overthrow, I know very well the family. I know Auntie Fosti, the wife. And I know that at times some of us have had to literally assist somehow for her upkeep. If they has tied up any amount somewhere, I know he would have fallen on that. And I'm yet to hear anybody who can point to a building that this is Acheampong's house, or this is what he was building, apart from the family home in Trebom in Ashanti region. I don't know if any, but I stand for correction. If anybody knows of any bank account that he had, any house that he had, whilst I was the press secretary, it didn't come up.
In spite of these facts, there are still people even today who wish for it to be believed that either General Acheampong or Kwame Nkrumah were corrupt and looted Ghana. How could their wives have struggled so much to cater for themselves and their children if this was truly the case? As history shows, any leader in the global south who dares to chart an independent path and assert the sovereignty of his country inevitably comes under attack from imperialist forces. The case was no different for Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and later for General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong. In the case of Nkrumah, there was a deliberate forcing down of the world price of cocoa in a bid to cause an economic crisis in Ghana. This, together with other schemes of economic sabotage, were carried out all in an attempt to turn Ghanaians against Kwame Nkrumah and to create the conditions for a military coup. Most notably, just 1 month after Kwame Nkrumah was illegally ousted, the world price of cocoa rose by 14%. The goal of getting rid of Kwame Nkrumah through economic sabotage had been successfully achieved. And in the case of General Acheampong, there was the global oil crisis, which was caused by upheavals in the Middle East and saw oil prices quadruple. This global oil crisis had devastating effects on Ghana's economy, as it did to many other countries across the world. More relevant to the subject of economic sabotage was the inevitable reaction to the Yentua policy. In the very early days of his presidency, General Acheampong announced the repudiation of about a third of Ghana's total debt. This was justified by the fact that This debt was found to have been tainted by corruption and other forms of illegalities. The bold move to categorically refuse to honor foreign debt obligations was unprecedented in Africa at the time and caused a lot of panic amongst Western creditors and financial institutions. There was a real risk of other heavily indebted nations following the example of General Acheampong, so all was done to undermine his government. Ghana was promptly cut off from trade credits and further loans and financial assistance. But this did not deter General Acheampong, who forged ahead and utilized a limited window for foreign assistance as an opportunity to implement his vision of self-reliance. More sinister were the covert attempts to sabotage Ghana's economy, especially after the global oil crisis had already caused severe damage, all in a bid to turn Ghanaians against General Acheampong and create the conditions for his removal, exactly as was done to Kwame Nkrumah a few years earlier.
You know, his famous that thing, he repudiated his, the national debt, and it caused a major constriction, because even when he had the money, the big powers wouldn't even sell him the spare parts to fix the vehicles, to give him the equipment. Okay. I understand even the mines were grinding to a halt, because even if you had the money, they wanted to cripple him, so you wouldn't even get spare parts to buy.
Oh.
You understand? So there was that tightening of the noose
around him.
So definitely things were really, really tough.
Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong are without a doubt two leaders who did a lot to promote national unity and love of country. In 1957, Nkrumah introduced the Avoidance of Discrimination Act, a law that banned political organizations that were based on racial, ethnic, regional, or religious affiliations. This was at a time when there were a number of political parties that had been formed on tribal or religious basis, a phenomenon that posed a real threat to national unity if left unchecked. Also, the Young Pioneer Movement was created to instill patriotism and discipline into young Ghanaians. It must also be noted that it is largely due to the efforts of Kwame Nkrumah that Ghana, as the unified nation state it is today, exists. There were many forces who sought to break away, but Kwame Nkrumah rallied the people of Ghana to resist all such attempts. For General Acheampong, national unity and the promotion of patriotism was just as important. It was under him that Ghana's national pledge was introduced in 1973, and it was made mandatory for all school children to recite it every morning before classes began. The idea was to instill a sense of patriotism into the young ones from very early on, so that they would grow up filled with a love for Ghana. A key policy of General Acheampong to enhance national unity was the decision to appoint regional commissioners to regions that they were not indigenous of. The conventional practice then and now has been to appoint people who come from the same region, but General Acheampong did things differently in a bid to show that one did not have to come from a place to serve it to the best of his or her abilities. Another fact that shows the importance General Acheampong gave to national unity is his introduction of the union government idea. Many people may not know this, but General Acheampong vehemently opposed partisan politics, which he saw as being divisive. For him, a non-party and non-partisan system was more conducive to national unity. For General Acheampong, party politics was only going to bring division, tribalism, victimization, nepotism, amongst other social evils. Today, many Ghanaians watching this video will agree that the fears of General Acheampong has come to pass after 33 years of multi-party politics.
I've come to believe that democracy as we practice it now will not help. You know, Western democracy has never developed the country.
So which type will help?
For me, it is either this grassroots thing, or, and I go back and say that maybe we should have given Kutu Acheampong his stone. The union government enterprise. Why it failed was because he wanted himself to be president. If he had taken himself out and created a forum, a platform, and say that anybody who believes that you have got good intentions about this country, step forward and let's develop this country. This country would have been great.
In the case of Kwame Nkrumah, it is no surprise that he favored the one-party system, a political system that promoted national unity and did away with the divisiveness of multi-party politics. Over the years, many criticisms have been leveled against Kwame Nkrumah for the one-party state decision, but history shows that this was the preferred system for many newly independent African states, as the most important consideration was national unity. No matter the criticisms that may be made against General Acheampong and Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, it should at least be admitted that, compared to the much-favored multi-party system, their options were far more favorable to fostering national unity. Kwame Nkrumah's role as the frontman of Pan-Africanism from the 1960s onwards is undeniable. His conscious efforts to assist other African countries fighting for their independence and to eventually unite Africa gave Ghana a special place in the hearts and minds of all Africans. This prestige was largely lost after Nkrumah was illegally deposed, as the NLC dismantled camps that Nkrumah had set up in Ghana for freedom fighters from all over Africa. In fact, many of these freedom fighters were arrested and handed over to the oppressors they were fighting. Also, the NLC openly aligned with imperialist powers and had no interest in Pan-Africanism. Following the NLC was Kofi Bouzier, who preferred a policy of dialogue with the apartheid regime in South Africa, at a time when most of Africa was fully opposed to that regime and sought to isolate them, a policy that was favored by Kwame Nkrumah. All of this saw Ghana's image as the base for the anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist struggle being further eroded. It was only after General Acheampong took power that this slide was arrested. As a mark of the confidence that other African heads of state had in him, General Acheampong was elected to chair the Liberation Committee of the Organization of African Unity. At a meeting of the Liberation Committee in Accra, General Acheampong boldly endorsed armed resistance as the only means of liberating South Africa from apartheid. He made his stance clear by stating, "We are duty-bound in the name of all that is decent and humane to defeat the enemy and thereby set free our people." Also, General Acheampong played a leading role in the formation of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, an organization that has enabled the free movement of people across West Africa and promoted trade in the sub-region. Aftermath of the 1966 coup, Kwame Nkrumah's policy of non-alignment, which meant having good relations with both Eastern and Western countries, was reversed. Thousands of Soviet and Chinese technicians who were assisting in the industrialization drive of Nkrumah were sacked from Ghana. The NLC had clearly chosen to be fully aligned with the West and were happy to antagonize the Eastern countries. All of Nkrumah's tireless efforts to build good relations with these countries had been virtually destroyed after his overthrow. It was only after General Acheampong took power that a deliberate effort was made once again to build good relations with Eastern countries. This saw several leaders from the Eastern Bloc visiting Ghana, with one of the first being the president of Hungary, Janos Kadar. At the same time, General Acheampong maintained very good relations with the West in a true depiction of non-alignment, just as Kwame Nkrumah had done skillfully a few years earlier. Thankfully, in the case of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the classified US government documents provide ample evidence of how he was viewed as a great threat and show the great efforts to undermine and eventually overthrow him. Unfortunately, the documents during the period of General Acheampong are yet to be made public, or maybe they are available but nobody has bothered to look. After all, there appears to be a consensus amongst Ghanaian historians and political scientists to overlook General Acheampong and his contributions. But who will want to bet against the fact that if the documents of the period are made available, we will find evidence of serious efforts to undermine and get rid of General Acheampong, just as it happened to Kwame Nkrumah. Until then, this is our attempt at highlighting the many undeniable but overlooked connections between Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and General Ignatius Kutu Acheampong. At this point, I need to call on you to please consider supporting our work financially so we can keep this going. as it takes a lot to make these videos. So if you see any value in our content, please consider supporting. The links to do so are in the description box of this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it to others. It goes a long way. Asante sana.